Thank you and welcome again to TxDOT's Roadside Chat webinar series. My name is Rebecca DeBrosco and I am the Environmental Program Manager for the Historical Studies team at TxDOT. I am really excited about our topic today, where we're going to be talking about park roads. We're going to talk about their history, their design, and threats to those park roads, and what you can do to save those cultural and natural resources throughout Texas. Here's our quick little agenda for today. As usual, if you're some of our frequent attendees to these presentations, I'm going to give a short little overview of who TxDOT is and what we do and how you can get involved with us, especially around our projects and concerns about the environment. Then we're going to move right into our presentations when the journey is the destination, about park road history, design, and landscapes. And then our presenters will be able to answer any questions that you have. Again, please put them into the chat or put them into the Q&A box, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So who exactly is TxDOT? Well, most people hear about TxDOT when we are going to make our roads even bigger, when we are putting in tolled highways, and when we are affecting your commute. But did you know that TxDOT does so much more? We help save our historic bridges throughout the state by moving them to parks, trails, or museums. For every transportation project that we do, TxDOT planners, engineers, and environmental scientists thoroughly review if our projects disrupt the quality of air and water by increasing traffic, create higher noise levels, put endangered plants or animals at risk, negatively impact communities and their resources, or change any historic buildings, structures, or archaeology sites. And all of this work happens before any construction starts. It's part of the work that we do every day that goes beyond the road. For instance, the photo that you see here represents how TxDOT built wildlife crossings to avoid traffic incidences with the endangered ocelot in South Texas. You can learn more about that story on our webpage and see who else uses the wildlife crossings. Our webpage is www.txdot.gov, and in the search box, put in the keyword "beyond the road," and it will take you right to that page. TxDOT's work over the environment is guided by laws like the National Environmental Policy Act and the National Historic Preservation Act. These laws require TxDOT to stop, look, and listen before starting construction. As most of us probably know, when driving down Texas roads, you can see evidence of how our history and our heritage is part of our transportation system in the buildings, bridges, and other structures that line our highways. Consider the last time you drove down an old farm-to-market road. Chances are you probably passed an old gas station or a hotel. You may have even crossed an iconic metal bridge. Construction projects, though, can change permanently the way that we experience these places. But did you know that you can be involved in our projects and make a difference about how we plan and execute these projects? At each step of our environmental review process, we work with the public and with stakeholders to provide an outcome that hopefully works best for our communities and for TxDOT. We'll discuss several environmental considerations with you, from historic site preservation to environmental responsiveness and to species or habitat conservation. Often, we plan to add sidewalks and bike paths to respond to community needs. Your feedback is extremely important for us in order to build a transportation system that is responsive to community needs. And I strongly encourage you to get involved in projects in your community and with things with TxDOT that are important to you. The best and easiest way is to interact with us for a public meeting, both either online or in person. I think starting now, from now forward, we're always going to have a virtual component of all of our public meetings where you can explore maps, speak to project managers, get questions answered, and easily provide comments about things that you're concerned about. You can also find current and upcoming projects that TxDOT has planned under our project tracker. This is an interactive GIS map that shows the next 10 years worth of projects underway that TxDOT has on its books. And so again, kind of the same way that you found Beyond the Road on our website, you would go to TxDOT.gov and keyword search project tracker. You can see the little thumbnail at the bottom center of this slide shows what that looks like. That's 10 years worth of projects across the state, from those that are about to undergo construction to those are still in the early planning phases. That way, you know what's going on in your community and how it may impact the resources and things that you care about. You can also meet and talk with your district or area engineer. And these are TxDOT employees that are in charge of actually project managing these projects in your community. And talking to them about the projects and about your concerns can help them and help us understand what is important to you. You can find who those people are for your district or your area on our website once again. Again, for real-time updates on projects, we also have a lot of social media. We're at TxDOT on pretty much all of the major platforms. Make sure to follow us and follow along and learn more about what we do. If you're specifically interested in historic preservation and the history and archaeology preservation that TxDOT does, we've developed a special training portal that talks more about what we do and why we do it and exactly how you can be involved in these projects. This training platform can be accessed through this website shown here, through this web address. It's not on the TxDOT.gov website. It's something a little bit different. And it has information, links, documents, and brochures that you can see about our whole process. It's a webinar training. There are 7 webinars you can watch. And if you watch all of them strung together at once, it's about an hour and a half. So it's not a really long, in-depth training, and you can watch them at your leisure and learn more about all of that. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. If webinars aren't your thing, if training is not your thing, you can find a little bit more about what we do on TxDOT.gov, searching for historic preservation. And there you can see our current archaeology that we have going on and other programs. Get links to our main partners at the Texas Historical Commission and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and get all that information there. All right, so now on to today's programming. I'm really excited about the presentations that we have today. And did you know that in addition to building and maintaining the state's interstates, U.S. highways, state highways, and farm-to-market road system, that state park roads are also part of TxDOT's responsibility? We partner with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to make sure that these park roads can handle all of the tourism traffic that comes to the parks, but still respect the natural and cultural significance of our state park system. In partnership with TPWD, TxDOT developed a road trip through Texas history brochure and GIS-based story map, where you can learn about state parks and transportation history across Texas. I'll put a link to the story map in the chat, and you can keep an eye out for the brochure at your local TxDOT Travel Information Center or at your local state park. Today, we're going to learn more about how the partnership between TxDOT and TPWD works and see how some recent projects played out. We're going to talk about how there are some threats to the park road system, but how we can all work together to solve these problems and keep us connected with Texas. Our first presenter today is Jennifer Carpenter. Jennifer is an environmental protection specialist in the historical studies branch at TxDOT. Before she came to TxDOT, she worked for TPWD in the historic sites and structures branch for 6.5 years. After Jennifer, we will hear from JJ Fleury, and he's the current manager of planning and GIS at TPWD. So Jennifer, I'm about to pass the presentation baton over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the nice introduction. All right. We're going to start by setting the scene a little bit. So just take a nice look at this picture here. Maybe close your eyes. Your journey begins when you enter a Texas state park. The winding road offers you a sneak peek of what's to come. And as you cruise along, you notice trees, plants, or animals, or maybe you spot a rustic-looking cabin. From the park headquarters, you venture to your picnic area, campsite, or hiking trail. Whoa, hold on. Oh man, okay. Sorry guys, I messed up the order here. Okay. The push for a state park system began in the 1920s. The National Park Service, which was established in 1916, held a national conference for state parks in 1921. And that same year, Governor Pat Neff, he began lobbying for a Texas state park system in order to showcase the variety of Texan landscapes, encourage tourism, and promote conservation. 2 years later, Neff convinced the legislature to create a Texas State Parks Board, which you can see here on the left-hand side. Originally, the board pursued small land donations to serve as waysides for automobile tourists, though they did also explore larger donations, sites that would offer recreational opportunities for summer vacationers. So by 1930, the Texas State Park System could claim 14 established sites that totaled approximately 800 acres. But it wasn't until 1933 and President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal that Texas began to invest and seriously develop its fledgling state park system. Of the many alphabet soup New Deal initiatives that FDR launched, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, proved most successful. The creation of the CCC aimed to provide relief, reform, and recovery by providing unemployed young men and later veterans jobs in nature conservation and national and state park development. Roosevelt's approach here was twofold. He wanted to improve the lot of the enrollees and the American landscape. In his mind, the two were intertwined, the health of the men, nature, and the nation. The Texas State Parks Board collaborated with the National Park Service on CCC projects slated for the state. NPS took the lead, envisioning a coherent system with an aesthetic that is often called NPS rustic or parkitecture. This style was developed by visionaries like Herbert Meyer, who you can see on the top left on the right-hand side. Meyer was a very accomplished architect. He designed buildings in Glacier, Yellowstone, and Yosemite National Parks in the 1920s. He found his inspiration in the arts and crafts movement, which featured rough, hand-hewn materials in a style he called freehand architecture. The style blended the built and natural, erecting structures sympathetic to the landscape. In other words, Meyer believed that the built environment should not distract, but enhance the natural beauty of a park setting. NPS rustic called for asymmetry, meant to complement the variances in nature, and almost all materials were stone, wood, or iron to blend with the organic materials of the region. You'll notice the style when you see buildings that appear to grow out of the ground. There's little demarcation between the foundation and the earth. Arches were frequently used to break up the mass of structures and to introduce irregularity to linear walls. Meyer developed what is known in design as the horizontal key, meaning that the building was oriented horizontally to the ground so that vertical elements like trees and plants stood out more. Most park structures designed by the National Park Service and built by the CCC in the 1930s followed these principles. Park planners, architects, and landscape architects executed blueprints, drawings, and master plans that illustrated the new vision on the page. NPS rustic style was well suited to the work of the CCC. Its arts and crafts inspired aesthetic required a lot of hand construction, which was perfect when you needed to employ a lot of people. Many details on a CCC structure appear to be handmade, and that's because they were. Wooden shingles were cut and shaped by hand. Iron for hinges, fixtures, and chandeliers was forged in blacksmith shops on site. Stones on a CCC building were dressed by hand. And additionally, local materials were often acquired from nearby forests or quarries, which required a lot of manpower to unearth the materials. All of these sources came from nearby forests, quarries, even adobe bricks were hand mixed on site. NPS Rustic characterizes Texas state parks, though stylistic variations occurred. There was really no off-the-shelf park plan. Local materials influenced the park's design, as did the architectural heritage of the area, the influence of officials, and changing national trends. Here's an example at the coastal park of Goose Island. They used a lot of shellcrete there. It's a concrete mix partially made of oyster shells. And you can see the unique texture of the material in the top left-hand corner. The building on the bottom shows the finished shellcrete concession building at Goose Island State Park. And they also use shellcrete to pave park roads, which leads us to today's focus. So while the Park Service designed fantastic buildings and amenities, the National Park Service designers understood the importance of park roads. They were one of the first features that park goers encountered, and they set the tone for the visit. They also were vital. They connected visitors to scenic vistas, campsites, and trails. In line with the NPS rustic design ideals, instead of leveling out the landscape to build straight, flat roads, architects let the roads follow the natural contours of the landscape. Retaining walls and guardrails made of locally quarried stone were dry stacked to achieve a natural look. Weathered surfaces, rough textures, and lichen on the surface of the rocks achieved the desired aesthetic. Workers used pickaxes, shovels, wheelbarrows, and hand rock drills. And of course, the sheer scale of some road building projects meant dynamite and dump trucks were necessary, but the emphasis on hand building and natural materials remained first in mind. I'm going to briefly go over two park roads within the Texas State Park system that are notable for their historic significance, Park Road 1 and Park Road 4. Park Road 1 is in Bastrop County. It's in Bastrop State Park, and it's composed of a couple different segments. The two longest are Park Road 1A within Bastrop State Park and Park Road 1C, which runs between Bastrop and Bisher State Parks and through Bisher State Park, which you can kind of see on the map here. The bigger parcel on the left is Bastrop State Park. Park Road 1A runs through that. You'll see the road continues on and then down Park Road 1C to the smaller parcel on the right-hand side, and that is Bisher State Park. Park Road 1A, it's a 4-mile long, 2-lane wide loop that begins and ends at Bastrop State Park's refectory building. It connects all the major attractions, follows along the edge of the park's lake, and alternates between heavily wooded areas of loblolly pine and open views from scenic high points. Park Road 1C is an 11-mile scenic byway connecting Bastrop and Bisher State Parks. The road passes through stands of the park's lost pines. Construction on Bisher State Park began after Bastrop, and it was intended to be less developed than Bastrop. So Park Road 1C allowed for this design decision. The resources and amenities at Bastrop could be accessed via the road. Within Bisher, the road also loops around the park's primary features. Designers used Bastrop's topography to their advantage, following the landscape to create a road that traversed the park's hills and valleys. they also employed the MPS rustic aesthetic on road-related features. Culverts, head walls, guardrails, retaining walls are all made of sandstone, which is the same material used in the park's buildings. Masonry features are stacked in irregular patterns, and the stone faces are rough to achieve that naturalistic look. Herbert Meyer played an influential role in the design and development of Bastrop. Other notable architects and landscape architects who worked at the park included Arthur Fair and Norfleet Bone. The park's master plan really served as a template for park building across the state. And to that end, Park Road 1 served as an example of what park roads could do. Provide visitor access while thoughtfully carving a route through the landscape to reveal beautiful vistas and protect sensitive resources. MPS rustic park road planning in Texas kind of reached its peak with the planning and construction of Park Road 4 in Burnet County. This roadway connects US 281, Longhorn Cavern State Park, Inks Lake State Park, and State Highway 29. MPS planners, again overseen by Herbert Meyer, designed Park Road 4 to be a scenic route from the beginning. The route follows the natural contours of the hill country landscape. So on the map up here, you'll see US 281 on the right-hand side. You would turn left to journey down Park Road 4. You can make a pit stop at Longhorn Cavern before beginning again on the road and make your way up north towards Inks Lake and eventually out to State Highway 29. Park Road 4 is a 15.5-mile drive across a rolling landscape of geological features like limestone karst and pink gneiss. And it took several groups to complete the road. The CCC built the first section in the mid-1930s, providing visitor access to Longhorn Cavern State Park. A different New Deal agency, the WPA, they extended the road west in the early 1940s, and then the Texas Highway Department, TxDOT today, completed the link to Inks Lake State Park by 1942. In addition to clearing and building the roadbed, workers constructed entry portals, masonry bridges, guardrails, and retaining walls. Along Park Road 4, there are over 60 stone and concrete culverts under the road, all artfully designed and built with excellent craftsmanship. Designers maximize the landscape to offer drivers dramatic curves and scenic vistas. Native trees and vegetation planted by the CCC still grow along the roadside. Originally gravel, the road was paved in 1942. And its character-defining features are the rolling topography with native vegetation. We've got live oaks, cedar elm, post oaks, ash junipers, Spanish dagger, prickly pear cactus, and pencil cactus, all making appearances along the road. Designed to be an experience, the road is an attraction in and of itself. Little's changed from the original plan, so when you drive the road today, you're following the same route and enjoying the same views that were designed over 80 years ago. Park Road 1 and Park Road 4 are outstanding examples of New Deal era roadways built in the MPS rustic style. Products of a focused design aesthetic and hours of hard work and craftsmanship, the roads complement their surrounding landscapes and offer drivers a scenic experiences that encourages one to slow down and enjoy the ride. With that short historical look back into the design of park roads, I'll now turn it over to JJ, who will share his perspective on contemporary park planning issues, and he'll also walk us through a few case studies about park roads at Bastrop, Mother Neff, and Goose Island State Parks. So I'm handing you the baton, JJ. You can take it away.
Well, great. Thank you, Jennifer. And as she mentioned, my name is JJ Fleury. I'm the State Parks Planning and GIS Manager, and excited today to talk to you about park planning and park roads in general. Working the WebEx for the first time. There we go. After developing our baseline inventory of natural, cultural, and historic resources, we take all that information and we start to think about how our parks, new plans and existing plans will respond to the new modern challenges today. I'm going to go over a few of those with increased visitation. A lot of our parks are at capacity these days, increased threat of storms, as well as surrounding urbanization. And so one of our main roles is organizing the numerous individuals and professionals that it takes to plan a new park or improve an existing park. And we want to make sure our designed responses to these modern challenges are able to assure the protection of the desired state park experience, one that's immersed in nature and removed from human impacted landscapes. And so today I'm going to talk briefly on park planning concepts and how we use GIS as a tool to address these modern challenges. And I'll wrap up with a call to action for all of us, with the ultimate goal of furthering the protection of park roads and making our landscapes more resilient. So here, have a simple diagram to kind of show the importance of our park planning effort and how it is nested very closely with our GIS team. You know, our planning and GIS staff work closely in coordination. There's a cyclical effort where as we collect more GIS data, that informs our park plans. And as we turn our park plans into GIS data, we can then study further relationships between our plans, the visitation, where visitors are going, and those resources. So one of our most popular tools that both planners and managers use is a dashboard that looks at visitation and revenue, as well as capital construction. And this allows us to look at both a park system as a whole, a region of a park, or a very specific park to look at different visitation trends for day use, overnight use, and how that may be impacted, you know, by a certain season, a weather event, or capital construction projects. So the example we see here on the screen is at Goose Island, where you can see a clear drop in visitation after Hurricane Harvey and then an influx of capital construction projects. Another one of our GIS tools we use daily is our Natural Resource Viewer, which takes all of our GIS data, which includes roads, campgrounds, buildings, as well as the natural resource data that includes potential habitats, existing habitats, threatened and endangered species, restoration efforts, fire management, and wildfire events. Also, one of the most useful parts of this tool is it incorporates historical imagery and a slider, which you see on the screen, that allows us to quickly look at change over time of that environment. And this can also be very useful for looking at impacts of urbanization or after a storm event. An example you're seeing on the screen is Bastrop fire from 1950s on the left, and more recent imagery from around 2020 on the right. And so going to go over a few modern challenges that the title bar suggests in the top left. And one of those we all know about and talk frequently is our parks being stressed by visitation and meeting that capacity level, as well as surrounding urbanization of those parks. And our state parks has employed new technology recently since the pandemic to allow online reservations for day use and overnight use, as well as reservation windows for particular parks where it's that capacity and visitation is even more relevant. And so our planning team has also made changes to the way we lay out our parks and program our use areas based off of this increased visitation that we'll look at here shortly. And so unfortunately for some, a line of cars at the park entrance is much more representative image of what a visitor might first notice. And so kind of jokingly, it's not the trees or the animals or the curves that Jennifer mentioned. It's this stacked line along the highway. And this amount of traffic and crowds is a huge safety hazard that TxDOT and TPWD have had to address. And so we have been installing some new headquarters around the park system and that are kind of responding to this dramatic increase in visitation. So historically, very few parks had a line of visitors off a highway waiting to get in at 8 a.m. So the plan that we see on the screen is a new circulation pattern at Inks Lake State Park that allows more traffic to queue off the road. is by allowing overnight visitors to come through and go immediately to a parking area, since they typically take more time to check in, with on the outside lane day use visitors going through a fee booth system that is a little bit quicker. So significant coordination for this plan occurred with TxDOT, THC, and TPWD due to the impacts on the historic park road, which included widening the road at this entrance, as well as improving CCC built culverts along the park road. So another modern challenge is just the way people are visiting our parks, the way they move through, and as well as that capacity challenge. And so historically, there wasn't much of a need to separate overnight use and day use from the main recreation area, as the small arrow diagram on the left shows, where you have day use visitors come in right through your campground to get to the lake or river. And so a lot of our parks, like we'll look at Inks Lake, kind of have that historic circulation pattern that we're needing to address today. The diagram on the far right, where you see the separation of use between day use visitors and camping overnight visitors, is now our ideal condition for how visitors move through the park to get to that resource. If you think about day use visitors showing up at 8 a.m. and campers waking up at 8 a.m., there can be quite a conflict there. So here's our park facility map at Inks Lake, highlighting the entrance off to the left. You can see the Park Road 4 kind of crossing the page. And so all visitors come through the entrance. And then if you're a day use visitor showing up with a boat, you go to the boat ramp, and you can see the number of campsites those visitors would pass as they progress through the site. Likewise, if you're showing up to go to the most popular swimming hole at Devil's Water Hole, all those day use visitors would be driving through a number of campsites to get to that area. So kind of our design response is expanding those more recreation opportunities and separating those programs. And so we're either doing that through land acquisition or reprogramming of recreational areas. So this example is of the old golf course area at Inks Lake that will become the major day use area of the park to relieve pressure on those overnight areas with the park. So we will have some day use facilities, picnic and trails, but primarily a new boat ramp to untangle that conflict that I mentioned earlier. Another part of the plan that I mentioned was the most popular swimming hole. As you see, the plan in the middle there shows the existing condition where visitors, day use visitors, all drive through past numerous campsites and then park to access the swimming hole. In our proposed future condition, we are removing some Park Road and adding a new entrance off Park Road 4 so that that entire area becomes a day use only area. And that will really improve the visitor experience for those campsites, and is more representative of the ideal condition that visitors are seeking today. Another modern challenge that we're seeing with increased frequency is wildfire. And the 2011 Bastrop fire encompassed 32,000 acres, including most of Bastrop State Park. And the impacts on the Scenic Corridor, Park Road 1, connecting Bastrop and Bisher, dramatically changed this experience, or the journey of traveling between these two parks. The wildfire damage was then further magnified by subsequent flooding, which caused great damage to the roads, culverts, and the two dams at Bastrop and Bisher. And here we can see on May 25th, 2015, the dam of the 10-acre lake at Bastrop State Park failed after excessive rains. All the water in the lake surged down Coppers Creek into the Colorado River. Part of the design response is coming back with prescribed fire, which is an essential tool to prevent wildfires and is essential to the resource management and public use plans of parks across the system. Additionally, community support with restoration efforts is critical to the wildfire response. New state park plans are increasingly connecting to local park plans to assure integration of recreation opportunities and community support. Another modern challenge mentioned is the increased intensity of storms. So here we see the impact of Hurricane Harvey and nearly a couple dozen of state parks that were closed immediately afterwards. and caused millions of damage in roads and buildings and other facilities of state parks, as well as damage to natural and cultural resources. And these images show flood damage in Bastrop and Bisher State Park, also after Hurricane Harvey. Thought of, even though they're inland, they do experience quite a dramatic impact because of the impact we mentioned of wildfire. And these subsequent floods are changing the character of the road and character of the park as initially envisioned by the CCC. And so part of the design response to these increased storms is shoreline restoration. And over the last several years, TPWD has implemented a marsh and shoreline restoration project at Goose Island, which has included oyster reefs, offshore breakwater, and containment levees. The image you see here is from the 1930s. It shows significantly more shoreline and marsh habitat than in 1996. The images from 1996 shows the green infrastructure implemented by TPWD. And these images are of a recent TPWD and TxDOT project at Goose Island that included a new road, retention wall, and shoreline buffer after the damage of Hurricane Harvey. Another modern challenge is the changing environmental conditions. So Mother Neff, one of the earliest state parks in our system, has historic facilities placed real close adjacent to the Leon River, which now has kind of changed its flooding patterns. And as we see in the image, frequently is closed down due to log jams, as well as spends significant days, weeks, months underwater. And so we're in the very initial phases of discussing feasibility studies to how we may open this park again, this part of the park in the bottomlands, because it's been closed for the last couple years. And one of the things we are considering is the possibility of relocating these structures to an area that is no longer prone to flooding. And part of our other design response for the frequent flooding at Mother Neff is the relocation of the primary facilities, that being headquarter and campground, to the uplands where flooding does not occur. And so in 2015, we installed a new headquarters, and that included a new entrance off to the north, as well as a new day use area and new multi-use camping. And TxDOT is also helping with our design response, and the bridge that we saw in the previous image is a project currently under construction at Mother Neff, and it is elevating the bridge profile to increase the clearance between the river to reduce the likely occurrence of future log jams. And here you can see the historic entrance to Mother Neff as part of the design to be maintained. Another modern challenge is this increased urbanization and impact on park roads. So more and more people are moving closer to our state parks, and in particular, right off park roads. And not only are the larger vehicles requiring more clearing for safe passage through a tree-lined corridor, but numerous driveway entrances and utility projects off park roads are being implemented. So TPWD has initiated a scenic corridor restoration project here at Goose Island that involves identifying and protecting the boundary along a historic park road with numerous adjacent landowners. It could simply be called a bollard and cable project. However, in order to get community buy-in to placing an ugly feature in what could be perceived as their backyard, significant community outreach has occurred to show the value of this scenic road corridor. So a well-protected park road can make the journey part of the destination. Park roads, although often have narrow corridors, greatly change the experience of a person passing through that environment. It can kind of almost in a good way blind them to the surrounding development and increased urbanization. And honestly, I say to myself that because I was fortunate to grow off a road that was very similar to a park road, it may be exactly maybe why I have the job that I do. I still am kind of excited to stick my arms out the window, have them hit the leaves, the risk of cutting it, because it sets up part of that arrival to your house, to your park. And so today I go as far as to say it was essential for my connection with nature. And I do strongly believe that the protection of our park roads, whether they be for a park road or for a community, are essential to maintaining that human connection with nature. And so here's just an aerial image where you can see the highway of 183 up to the north and a narrow road corridor connecting all the way to Palmetto to the south. And that previous image shows the wooded entrance that all visitors would pass through for a couple miles as they show up to Palmetto. What they don't see is the numerous deforestation and agricultural fields just outside of their view. So a call for action and some tools for building a resilient landscape. Number one, let's educate yourself and others on those historical conditions, climate change, sustainable land practices, green infrastructure, tree protection and trimming. Number two, build community support. And number three, advocate for those laws, policy standards, and getting that recognition that can help protect a resource. So education on tree trimming standards, it sounds simple, but we all know that trees do require frequent maintenance and cutting along park roads, and you do it the wrong way and it can result in death of that tree. And so there's numerous resources online, as well as we encourage everyone to approach our park staff who are experts in tree planting standards and tree trimming standards. And other ways that we can do to promote healthy tree growth, including amending the soil and protecting them from compaction. And as we've seen, managing and protecting a park road involves numerous agencies. Most importantly, what I want to convey is that community involvement and outreach is essential to the process. Because park roads are often miles long, it takes many eyes on the road to properly monitor how the road, its trees, vegetation, and historic resources are protected. I'm often reminded of the number one way our park managers become aware of a tree falling over a road or trail is from a visitor who reported it as an issue. So many state parks have organized groups that actively support their park. These nonprofit organizations, sometimes called friends groups, help with daily programs, special events, fundraising, and public education. These groups serve as important links to local communities and park user groups, as well. Just like TxDOT's Adopt a Highway program, community partnerships provide additional skills, contacts, and resources of private citizens and businesses that might not be readily available. So as Jennifer touched on, the CCC between 1934 and 1942 built Park Road 4, which connects Inks Lake and Longhorn Cavern State Park. Their work included the eastern entrance portals, masonry bridges, retaining walls, 2 park overlooks, culverts, guardrails, guard walls, and large live oak trees and other trees were intentionally preserved by the CCC during this road work, as indicated by historic plans and sketches. With the advocacy of TPWD and support from the THC and local community, the entirety of Park Road 4 was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2011 as Park Road 4 Historic District. This designation has now protected the park road from additional driveway development and utility projects as the surrounding suburbanization of the area has exploded. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and hope the title of our presentation, When the Journey is the Destination, rings true for the value of park roads to parks and communities that connect them, as well as your own role in establishing a climate resilient landscape. On the screen, you can have our contact information, but for now, I'll pass it back over to Jennifer and Rebecca, and we'll address any questions that the group may have.
JJ, thank you so much. That was really interesting and a great presentation. And it seems like a lot of the questions that are coming in are for you. So don't mute yourself just yet. But if you have some further questions, don't forget to put them in the Q&A box or put them in the chat and we can ask them. The first question that comes to mind, especially when you were talking about the overcrowding of some of our state parks, is there any plans to create new state parks?
Yes, that's actually
Politics.
yeah, that's a big part of our daily role is we do have several new state parks on the horizon. Here for our new centennial celebration in 2023, we are going to be opening Palo Pinto Mountain State Park just outside the Fort Worth area. And shortly after that, we're currently in the planning and design phase for Albert Bessie and Kronkosky State Natural Area. So those are the two primary ones that are on the near horizon, but we have maybe you read about Powderhorn State Park is also a future park, but we've been fortunate with recent changes in legislation to have money for land acquisition, and so it's something we are actively engaged in, and it's not just new parks. We also are addressing existing parks with significant acreage as well that can provide new opportunities.
Great. Let's see. So part of spending our time at state parks is also, slowing down from our daily lives. And I thought of that when you showed the entrance to Palmetto State Park. You've got 2 miles to kind of get off the crazy 183 and take a deep breath, and then you're at the park. So how does, TPWD work with law enforcement to make sure people aren't speeding and slow people down? So there's not those concerns about safety and needing to widen the roads and remove the trees because people crash into them and stuff like that.
So yeah, all of our parks do have park police officers, which more or less function similar to standard police officers that you would see in the city, who do monitor for speeding and any other unsafe activities of vehicles. And then the other part of it is once inside park boundaries, we can employ certain traffic additions, whether those be speed cushions or signs, and then again, another part that Jennifer touched on more that we use a lot are the way we design a road, a particular curve to slow people down, and that idea of a park road being narrow and tree to kind of set up the behavior or the perception of the visitor that they want to slow down. Those signs look for wildlife or caution entering a recreation area, but there are design moves we do with curves and forced stops to make sure visitors are being safe.
Awesome. Good.
And can I just add on? I think I neglected to mention this in the beginning, but that was what really impressed me as I came to learn more about park design and park roads, was that, you think you're entering this natural landscape that's untouched by the human hand, when a lot of care and forethought goes into designing the park, how you access it, how you get from one point to another. And I just found that really, really interesting as I learned more about park roads. And it does encourage you to slow down and take a minute, like really enjoy the moment, savor it, look around a little bit more, notice things maybe you wouldn't have noticed if you were just speeding through. It's not a highway it's in a park. It's this really nice leisurely road. And I think that's made all the more interesting as JJ went through all the challenges that Parks and Wildlife is facing today with the increased visitation and just the wider vehicles and the bigger rigs that people bring in to, set up for a camping weekend. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Those cars are very different than they were in the 1930s and 40s. So I think, a park road is an excellent way to it's a nice case study to think about changing needs, to think about the way, changing ideas and planning, and to use that historical perspective as a way to kind of guide your experience of the park. Like, some of those things that were true in the 30s remain true today. You still want to slow down. You still want to look at the animals and take a hike, check out the scenic vistas. So even though it's been however many decades since the park roads and the parks were first designed, people still love them for those reasons. So that was just something I think I might have skipped over in the beginning. So I wanted to add that in here.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, well, that kind of leads me into a question that I have for you because, this design and everything is really thoughtful. And I'm just curious as a historian and someone with that sort of background, and this is not on the record, right? But what do you think about that proposal to move the buildings at Mother Neff? That's a pretty drastic response. So I was just curious what you thought about, or what you would like TPWD to think about if they go forward with that proposal.
Well, I'm sure, it's in good hands as evidenced by JJ. They're still very thoughtful today in their design approaches and how people use the parks. But yeah, it's a big decision to have to make to relocate buildings. I mean, the whole point of preservation is you want people to enjoy and appreciate it, right? And if they can't do that because the park is closed or a feature is flooded, they're not going to come away knowing that history or understanding of what, the history of the place. So it's something to be thought through very carefully. But there are, ways and means and professionals out there that relocate historic buildings. It's not it's not a common thing, but it is a preservation option. Yeah, I think that's it. I'll be curious to see how it all plays out. It is nice to be by the river, but if the river's going to threaten the resource, you need to take some kind of action or you're going to lose the resource. So Godspeed, JJ. However you guys decide.
Well, I will just, yeah, I'll just add we're, very early discussions, and it is like a multifaceted feasibility analysis of looking at the flooding, looking at just the ability to move a historic structure, what that means. And public meeting component as well will be seeking input, making sure it is appropriate and what's best, and just want to stress very, very early initial discussions here on Parks and Wildlife side. But we definitely, as you say, will look at what relationships of the buildings themselves need to be maintained, as well as their relationships to the resource, and hopefully we can find the best solution.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that you're at early conversations and that you're going to talk with the public and get, talk about these things. And I'm just glad you left it in there, because I think it's important to start talking about how we might need to make some really drastic changes to our environment to address some really drastic things that are happening that the environment was never created to deal with, back in the 1930s and things like that. So that leads to another question that has about interpretation. Does TPWD have interpretation about how parks were built? And are y'all talking about this sort of stuff to the park visitors too?
For sure. It exists in various ways, from, a sign that would be at a historic site of the CCC legacy particular to that park or that structure or that site, as well as the larger system of state parks. We also have, interpretive programs led by our interpretive staff that can engage in a different way that signs can't. And we also have, online information or digital content for visitors to access. And so definitely is the answer.
All right, cool. Is there a place, Jennifer, where we can learn more about the CCC and the state parks? It seems like such a significant, company or whatever that was part of that.
Yeah, for sure. The CCC was very active in Texas between 1933 and 1942. They built over 50 parks across the state, which is a lot more than several other states got. So, that Texas exceptionalism even rang true back then a little bit. But to learn more, I would definitely recommend Cindy Brandemart's book, Texas State Parks and the CCC. That's a great coffee table book, but it's got beautiful photography and lots of great information about the design, the different companies that built the park, the daily lives of the men who joined up with the CCC and experienced something completely new. If you are more into online resources, there's the TexasCCCParks.org website. That's again a great clearinghouse of historic photography, park profiles. You can also find, if you really want to get nerdy, the actual blueprints that the National Park Service drew for all of the parks. They're available at the Texas State Library and Archives website. A quick Google search, you should be able to pull those up in a searchable database that they have there. So there's tons of information available online, and even nice books that you can read up, learn more about the CCC, the New Deal, and the imprint that they left on our state park system.
Cool. I might have to do a topic about this for the roadside chat in the future, because those New Deal agencies were also really big in building roads and things like that across Texas too. And I think that's a really interesting story to tell that a lot of people don't really know about. There was a, I'm going to use this to get on my little soapbox a little bit, but there was a National Youth Administration organization, and they built a good number of roadside parks in Texas. So to put teenagers to work, and some of those roadside parks were built by them, which I think is a pretty cool story. All right, let's see. I've got a few more questions. Someone had a question about the design changes. I think especially, we were talking about Inks Lake and stuff like that. Those design changes, does that mean that TPWD needs additional staff to staff those new day use areas or other amenities? How is that going to work as far as the workforce goes?
So in particular at Inks Lake, it may be necessary. That in general, I would defer to our regional director who handles operations questions, but we do have the ability to make that request with through legislation. But for each new park, we'll kind of change the question there. Is yes, it does require new staff from our typical park manager, assistant manager, park police officer, office staff, park rangers, resource staff. And then here at headquarters, we also have more of our program specialists, our culture resource specialists, natural resource specialists, historians that also support, the new parks. But when we do increase recreation opportunities, one of the first questions that comes up is, do we have the staff to do it? And if we don't have the staff to do it, then we can't do it. So that's why we can't, even though we may have particular land within our agency, we can't just open it up if there isn't staff there to manage it. So it's part of the planning and operating process. And for specifically, a park, I would need to defer or talk with the regional director or park manager there.
All right. Okay, and I'm going to wrap this up with a question for the both of you to answer, because I want to know, what is your favorite state park that you visited, or what is your favorite park road, if you had to pick?
That's a very tough question. I mean, Park Road 4 is just really beautiful. It's close to Austin, so I've been able to drive it a couple times. It really does have some dramatic curves and scenic vistas, like I mentioned. And it's fun because you can visit more than one park as you drive along the road, get a different experience depending on what you're looking for. But I also have to give a shout out to West Texas, and I love Indian Lodge. Got to stay there once, and that was just fantastic. And they've got their park road within the park, takes you up high, you get a good view there. There's also just driving around in West Texas is unparalleled. The landscapes are magnificent, and you really do well, speed there is like kind of strange. You're like, you want to go slow and take it all in, but there's no one around, so somehow you're driving the speed limit or faster accidentally. But I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Those are my votes for right now, but you could ask me tomorrow and they might change.
All right.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Don't ever like really just saying one park, but do really enjoy living here in Austin with just how many unique parks are within an hour's drive, you know. So being able to go to Bastrop, Bisher, being able to go to Palmetto, being able to go you know, Enchanted Rock's a little bit beyond an hour, but just here in Austin makes for a great place to see diverse landscapes of Texas. But if I do choose one, personally, I do really like McKinney Falls State Park here in Austin, and have this kind of philosophy of it's sometimes better to know one park really, really, really well than just little pieces of many parks. And so, lucky enough to live with McKinney Falls as backyard, and have done a good job knowing the ins and outs of that park.
Yeah, I don't know if I should say this, but I also live in Austin and have been to McKinney Falls a grand total of 1 time. So I need to put that on my list and get out there more often, because it's got such a great mix of natural and cultural resources. And it is, like you said, right in our backyards. And well, I'd like to go ahead and just thank both of you so much for your time today and for sharing these stories with us and talking about something a little bit different. You know, it's not all interstates and massive interchanges here, but some park roads and how we all work together to try to achieve some of these challenges. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. I encourage you to continue to connect with us and you know, check out all of the resources that we have online. If you have any suggestions for other topics that you might like to hear us explore, let us know. We're always looking for things to talk about and share with you. We enjoy doing these things. And again, I really appreciate your time today, Jennifer and JJ and everyone else. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.